Ever heard of black sites? Sounds kind of creepy, right? Like something straight out of a spy movie.
Yeah, it does have a sinister ring to it.
Well, today we're diving into that world, a really controversial chapter of U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about those secret prisons, the ones the CIA ran after
And
9/11.
black sites.
Right, black sites, used to detain and interrogate suspected terrorists. And what's especially fascinating is that we're going way beyond just the headlines for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
We're going to use testimonies from people who actually experienced these sites firsthand
Incredible sources.
to uncover this global network, the interrogation techniques they used, and the huge ethical questions they raise.
It's a dark period, no doubt, but understanding it is crucial, especially now.
Totally. So set the scene for us. What was the atmosphere like after 9/11?
Imagine the fear, the chaos. The government was under immense pressure, right, to prevent another attack no matter what. That's where the idea of black sites emerged.
So these black sites were basically a way to work outside the U.S. legal system.
Exactly. To detain and interrogate suspects without the constraints of the law.
And where were these sites?
Scattered across the globe. Thailand, Poland, Romania, Lithuania, even Morocco and Afghanistan. There were rumors of sites on ships, like floating prisons in international waters.
Wow. It's like a secret network of complicity. They were everywhere.
The CIA negotiated secret agreements with foreign intelligence agencies, a clandestine web of hidden prisons.
One early example that really gives you a sense of this is Detention Site Green in Thailand. It was on a former U.S. military base. Kind of eerie, don't you think?
Yeah, repurposing a ghost from the past.
And this is where they held some of those high-value detainees,
Yeah.
like Abu Zubaydah. They believed he was a top al-Qaeda official.
Abu Zubaydah's case is crucial because it really shows the ethical mess at the heart of this whole program. This man endured 83 waterboarding sessions.
83. Seriously.
Think about that. You've given information, valuable intel, but you're still subjected to 83 waterboarding sessions. What does that tell us about the true purpose of the program?
Yeah, that's messed up. And waterboarding was just one of many brutal things they did. They also used walling, slamming detainees against a wall, sleep deprivation, stress positions, confinement in tiny boxes.
Sensory deprivation, psychological manipulation.
They even used loud music, extreme temperatures as tools of coercion.
It's chilling how they tried to justify these brutal tactics by calling them enhanced interrogation techniques. Essential, they said, to get vital intel and prevent future attacks.
Right, enhanced interrogation techniques. That's a pretty euphemism.
And later, the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded that a lot of the intel they got was either already known or unreliable. So not only morally wrong, but also potentially ineffective.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just Detention Site Green. There's another site that's especially horrifying, Detention Site Cobalt, also known as the Salt Pit, or the Dark Prison, near Kabul in Afghanistan.
Total darkness, constant noise, sleep deprivation. They even used diapers because detainees were often held in stress positions for so long they couldn't even use a toilet.
Awful. That sounds like a nightmare.
Detention Site Cobalt really shows how the desire for intel, when it's not checked by law and ethics, can spiral into brutality. And tragically, a detainee named Gul Rahman actually died from hypothermia in his cell there. The human cost of this program is undeniable.
So we've established how brutal this was.
Mm.
But how did it even happen? Who created this system?
Two psychologists, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, were key in designing and implementing the CIA's enhanced interrogation program. They drew from their experience with SIRE techniques.
Wait, Sarah, what's that?
SIRE stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. They're actually techniques used to train soldiers to resist torture, you know?
Oh, okay.
But Mitchell and Jessen, they adapted these techniques to use on detainees, basically turning methods meant to help people withstand torture into tools of torture.
That's a really disturbing twist. So we have this program shrouded in secrecy, operating outside the law, using these brutal tactics. But how did the world even find out about these black sites? How did the truth come to light?
It's really a testament to investigative journalism and the courage of whistleblowers. The CIA tried so hard to keep everything secret, but cracks started to appear. The Washington Post and other media outlets were crucial in exposing the program.
So the media really forced the government's hand.
Exactly. And John Kiriakou, a former CIA officer involved in capturing Abu Zubaydah, he went public about the use of waterboarding. It cost him his freedom. He ended up in prison. This whistleblowing, along with the work of journalists, forced the issue into the public eye, leading to investigations and congressional hearings. And finally, the Senate Intelligence Committee launched a massive investigation, resulting in a 6,700-page report. It exposed the program's extent and, critically, its lack of effectiveness.
Hold on, 6,700 pages. That's like a whole library. What did that report actually find?
It didn't just reveal the black sites and the horrible techniques, it also debunked the CIA's claims that these methods worked. It concluded that they often exaggerated their effectiveness, and in fact, detainees often gave valuable information before being subjected to these brutal methods.
So, morally reprehensible, legally questionable, and ultimately ineffective. What happened next?
President Obama shut down the program in 2009, but its legacy continues.
Yeah.
It raises ethical and legal questions about torture, about human rights violations, and about the balance between national security and individual liberties. That's a debate that continues to this day.
And it's a debate with real human consequences. Think about people like Maher Arar, a Canadian-Syrian dual citizen. He was detained at JFK Airport and then rendered to Syria.
Oh, that case was all over the news.
He was tortured for almost a year before being released with an apology.
Arar's case, among many others, shows how this program operated outside the bounds of law. It highlights how dangerous it is to sacrifice fundamental human rights in the name of security, especially when the intel itself might be flawed.
And of course, all of this has led to numerous legal battles and international condemnation. The European Court of Human Rights, for example, ruled that Poland violated the European Convention on Human Rights by hosting a CIA black site and participating in torture.
It's a complex legal landscape. And then there's Guantanamo Bay, where detainees, including some transferred from black sites, are held indefinitely without trial. A legal and moral quagmire.
And then there's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, considered the mastermind of 9/11. He was subjected to 183 waterboarding sessions. But because of that, anything he said is basically useless in court.
It highlights how this program undermined the rule of law.
It's a classic example of how the ends don't justify the means. Shortcuts taken in the name of security can create even more problems.
It's a lot to take in. This deep dive into CIA black sites has taken us to some pretty dark places. This program, driven by fear and urgency, spiraled into a system of torture and human rights abuses. And despite all the secrecy and justifications, it failed to achieve its goals.
Yeah.
It didn't produce reliable intelligence, it damaged America's reputation, and it created this legal and moral mess that we're still dealing with today.
This deep dive forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about the choices our government made after 9/11.
It raises big questions about the balance between security and liberty, the effectiveness of torture, and the importance of transparency.
Definitely heavy stuff. And we've only just scratched the surface. But that's what these deep dives are for, to encourage further exploration.
Absolutely. If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the CIA torture program. It's a deep, unflinching look at what happened. There are also some incredible documentaries out there like The Forever Prisoner and Taxi to the Dark Side. They offer these powerful personal accounts of how this program affected people.
And for those who like to read, there are some amazing books written by former CIA officers, detainees who experienced these sites firsthand, and journalists who've spent years investigating this story.
Yeah, those firsthand accounts are essential to understanding the human cost.
Right. They offer diverse perspectives that'll help you form your own understanding of this complex issue.
It's so important that we keep talking about the ethics of intelligence gathering and interrogation. This black site program may be officially over, but its impact continues. Understanding it is crucial, especially in today's world.
You know, one thing that keeps bugging me is the level of international cooperation involved. It wasn't just a rogue CIA operation. They needed help from other countries to make it work. Why would other countries get involved?
It's like they created this secret network of complicity, like we talked about earlier. Thailand, Poland, Romania, Lithuania, even Morocco, they all played a role, either hosting these sites or helping move detainees around.
It's mind-boggling. Why would countries risk their reputations to help the CIA? Was it purely political, or was there something darker going on?
It was complicated, a mix of things. Some, like Poland, really wanted to strengthen their ties with the U.S., especially after 9/11. They saw it as a way to gain favor, maybe get access to intelligence or military support. Others might have been more pragmatic. Maybe they saw financial incentives or aid in exchange for, turning a blind eye. Or maybe just providing logistical support.
So some countries might have felt pressured. Others saw it as an opportunity. But what about countries with less than stellar human rights records? Did they have a different reason to be involved?
Yeah, in some cases, there might have been a shared fear of terrorism, a willingness to work together, even if it meant bending their own laws. It's a tangled web, this whole thing. It underscores how far the Black Site program reached. It wasn't just some isolated incident. Its impact spread way beyond those secret prisons.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot. And on top of all of this, we have to factor in the role of private contractors. The CIA didn't have the resources to do this alone, right? They relied heavily on companies and individuals with specialized skills.
Oh, absolutely. Companies provided everything: logistics, transportation, interrogation services, psychological assessments.
It was essentially outsourcing part of the intelligence apparatus.
Yeah, to the private sector. It raises big questions about accountability, about oversight. You have private companies doing this really sensitive work. It becomes even harder to track what's happening, to hold people responsible for potential abuses.
Right. Another layer of secrecy on top of an already secretive operation. Makes you wonder, how much do we really know about what happened? And then there's the whole issue of extraordinary rendition. This is where the CIA abducted people and flew them to other countries.
Often without any legal process, yeah.
Rendition flights were key to this program. They moved detainees between sites, sometimes across multiple continents, always under the radar.
They exploited legal loopholes, operating in this gray area. By transferring detainees to countries with, let's say, weaker human rights protections, they could essentially outsource the torture and avoid accountability.
I understand the need for intel, but sending someone to a country known for torture, doesn't that cross a line? How do we square that with our values?
It's a tough question, no doubt. And what's even more disturbing is that some individuals subjected to extraordinary rendition were later found to be completely innocent.
Innocent?
Or at least had very weak links to terrorism.
That's terrifying. Imagine being in the wrong place at the wrong time and getting caught up in this shadowy network, especially if you're innocent. What happened to them?
It was devastating. Detained without charge, often tortured, their lives irrevocably changed. It's a stain on the U.S., and it raises fundamental questions about the limits of power, the importance of safeguarding human rights, even in times of crisis.
It's a lot to grapple with. As we go deeper into this, it's crucial to focus on the people who are caught in the middle of all this. We need to hear their stories, to understand their experiences, and acknowledge the impact.
Absolutely. The human cost of this program is often overshadowed by the political and legal debates. Centering the voices of those who were detained, tortured, disappeared, it's essential. Their stories are the counter-narrative to the official justifications.
And they remind us that security can't come at the expense of basic human rights. When we compromise our values, we risk becoming the very thing we're fighting against. And that's, I think, the most important lesson of the Black Site program.
Couldn't agree more. As we've been talking about the CIA black sites and the interrogation techniques, it's crucial to remember the psychological impact of these experiences on detainees.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about the physical pain, but the mental and emotional trauma that lingers long after they've been released.
Right. It's like trying to rebuild a life after a devastating earthquake, Yeah. The foundations are shattered and the aftershocks continue to shake the very core of their being.
That's a powerful analogy. It really drives home the long-term impact of these experiences. We've talked about the physical torture and the psychological impact. But what about the families of the detainees? How are they affected?
You're right. We can't forget about the families. They suffered immense emotional distress and uncertainty during the detention period, and they often face significant challenges in supporting their loved ones upon their release. The ripple effects of the Black Site program extend far beyond the individual detainees. Families were torn apart, communities were traumatized, and trust in government institutions was eroded.
It makes you wonder about the broader impact on global perceptions of the United States. I mean, the revelations about the Black Site program and the use of torture really damaged the image of the U.S. as a defender of human rights and the rule of law.
Without a doubt. It created a sense of hypocrisy, especially in countries where the U.S. had long advocated for human rights and democratic values. The Black Site program undermined U.S. credibility on the world stage and fueled anti-American sentiment.
It's like throwing a stone into a still pond. The ripples spread outwards, disrupting the tranquility and leaving lasting marks on the surrounding landscape.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it reminds us that actions have consequences, and those consequences can be far-reaching and long-lasting. The legacy of the Black Site program continues to haunt the United States, and it will take a concerted effort to repair the damage and rebuild trust.
So where do we go from here? What steps can be taken to ensure that something like this never happens again? What can we as individuals do to make a difference?
Well, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge the mistakes of the past. There needs to be a full and transparent accounting of what happened in the black sites, and those who are responsible for abuses need to be held accountable.
And accountability means more than just apologies or investigations.
Right. You are exactly right. It requires concrete actions to prevent future abuses. That means strengthening legal frameworks, reforming intelligence practices, and ensuring robust oversight of covert operations. We need to close the legal loopholes that allowed the Black Site program to operate in the shadows, and we need to create a culture of transparency and accountability within the intelligence community.
We've already talked about how the program undermined the rule of law and damaged the reputation of the United States. But I'm also thinking about the individuals involved. I mean, these psychologists who designed the enhanced interrogation techniques, they were experts in their field. How did they justify their actions?
That's a crucial question. James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, the psychologists who played a pivotal role in the program, argued that their methods were necessary to obtain critical intelligence and prevent future attacks. They drew upon their experience with SARA techniques, which are designed to train soldiers to resist torture, and adapted them for use on detainees. However, the Senate Intelligence Committee report concluded that much of the information obtained through these methods was either already known or unreliable.
Wait, so these psychologists literally twisted methods designed to resist torture into tools of torture. That's messed up. How did they justify that?
Their justification rested on the belief that these techniques were effective and that the potential benefits of obtaining critical intelligence outweighed the ethical concerns. However, this justification has been widely criticized, and many experts argue that torture is inherently ineffective and unreliable as an interrogation method.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it, when you start compromising your values in the name of security? It's hard to know where to draw the line.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to have strong legal frameworks and ethical guidelines in place to prevent these kinds of abuses from happening. The Black Site program is a stark reminder of what can happen when those safeguards are absent or ignored.
Okay, so we have these psychologists who are claiming their methods were necessary, but then we have the Senate Intelligence Committee saying those methods were ineffective. Where do we land with all of this?
The debate over the effectiveness of enhanced interrogation techniques continues to this day. Some argue that valuable intelligence was obtained through these methods, while others maintain that torture is never justified and that it produces unreliable information. The Senate Intelligence Committee report concluded that the CIA repeatedly exaggerated the effectiveness of these techniques and that detainees often provided valuable information before being subjected to them.
So we're left with this moral and ethical dilemma. On the one hand, there's the argument that we need to do everything we can to prevent terrorism, but on the other hand, we have the fundamental principle that torture is wrong and it's ineffective.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But it's a conversation we need to keep having. We need to learn from the mistakes of the past and ensure that we never again sacrifice our values in the name of security.
And it's not just about looking back. It's about applying those lessons to the challenges we face today.
Absolutely. The fight against terrorism is ongoing, and we need to find ways to address it that are both effective and consistent with our values. That means investing in intelligence gathering methods that are ethical and reliable, building strong relationships with allies, and addressing the root causes of terrorism.
It sounds like a multifaceted approach is needed, one that goes beyond just military action and addresses the underlying social, economic, and political factors that contribute to terrorism.
You're right. It's a complex problem that requires a complex solution. But the first step is to acknowledge the problem, learn from the past, and commit to doing better in the future.
And what about those who were involved in the Black Site program? What happened to them? Were they held accountable for their actions?
The issue of accountability is a complex one. While some individuals like John Kiriakou face legal consequences for their role in the program, many others did not. There have been calls for further investigations and prosecutions, but so far there has been limited accountability for those who authorized, designed, and implemented the program.
So in a sense, the system that allowed these abuses to happen is still in place.
In many ways, yes. And that's why it's so important to keep pushing for reform and accountability. We need to ensure that those who violate human rights are held responsible regardless of their position or power.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the actual experience of being detained in a Black Site. What was it like for these detainees? We've talked about the interrogation techniques and the psychological impact, but I'm curious about the day-to-day reality of being held in one of these secret prisons.
It's hard to fully comprehend the experience of being detained in a Black Site, but we can get a glimpse of it through the testimonies of former detainees. Imagine being held in complete isolation, often in a small, dark cell with no contact with the outside world. The sensory deprivation, the constant uncertainty, the lack of control over your own life. It's a form of psychological torture that can have devastating effects.
It sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel. Did the detainees have any rights? Were there any rules or protocols governing their treatment?
The Black Site program was designed to operate outside the bounds of normal, legal, and ethical constraints. Detainees were not afforded the same rights as those held in conventional prisons. They had no access to lawyers, no right to a fair trial, and no guarantee of humane treatment.
So it was essentially a legal black hole where anything went.
In essence, yes. The CIA argued that these extraordinary measures were necessary to combat terrorism, but the lack of transparency and accountability created a breeding ground for abuse and human rights violations.
It's horrifying to think that this was happening in the 21st century, in a country that claims to uphold the rule of law.
It's a stain on our national conscience, and it's a reminder that we must always be vigilant in protecting our values and holding our government accountable.
We've talked a lot about the negative impact of the Black Site program, the torture, the psychological trauma, the erosion of trust. But were there any unintended consequences? Did the program have any unforeseen effects that maybe the CIA didn't anticipate?
The Black Site program, despite its cloak of secrecy, had ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate goals of intelligence gathering. One of the most significant unintended consequences was the radicalization of individuals who were detained but later released. In some cases, the experience of being subjected to torture and inhumane treatment fueled a sense of anger and resentment towards the United States, leading some to join or support extremist groups.
So the very program designed to combat terrorism may have inadvertently contributed to its spread.
It's a tragic irony. The use of torture and extrajudicial detention can be counterproductive in the fight against terrorism, as it can create martyrs and fuel extremist propaganda.
It sounds like a vicious cycle where violence begets violence and fear leads to more fear. How do we break free from that cycle?
Breaking free from the cycle of violence requires a multi-pronged approach that addresses both the symptoms and the root causes of terrorism. That means investing in diplomacy and conflict resolution, promoting economic development and social justice, and upholding human rights and the rule of law.
So it's not just about military might, but about addressing the underlying conditions that make people vulnerable to extremist ideologies.
Precisely. It's about creating a world where people feel safe, secure, and hopeful about the future.
Okay, so we've talked about the unintended consequences of the Black Site program, but were there any instances where the program actually achieved its stated goals? Did the CIA obtain any valuable intelligence from the detainees?
That's a question that has been hotly debated. The CIA has claimed that the enhanced interrogation techniques used in the Black Sites were effective in obtaining critical intelligence that helped prevent terrorist attacks. However, these claims have been disputed by many experts, including the Senate Intelligence Committee, which concluded that much of the information obtained through these methods was either already known or unreliable.
So it's still a matter of debate whether the ends justified the means.
Exactly. The moral and ethical complexities of the Black Site program make it difficult to assess its overall effectiveness.
This whole discussion raises a really important question for our listeners. Can we truly claim to be a nation of laws if we operate secret prisons outside those laws?
That's a question that goes to the heart of our national identity and values. The Black Site program challenged the very principles of due process, fairness, and accountability that are supposed to be the foundation of our legal system.
You know, as we've been talking about the impact of this Black Site program, I keep thinking about the psychological toll, not just on the detainees, but on the people working there too. The interrogators, the guards, everyone involved. It's got to mess with your head.
Absolutely. It's not just about the moral injury interrogators might face. It goes deeper than that. Imagine working in a place where secrecy is everything, where the lines get blurred, where you're constantly seeing suffering and brutality.
Yeah.
That kind of environment, it can change how you see the world, erodes your empathy, leaves scars. Like that saying, if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back at you. Exactly. And the people in those Black Sites, they were staring into the abyss every day, living in a world where the rules didn't apply, where they thought the ends justified any means.
Right.
That kind of moral compromise, it can really damage you.
It makes you wonder, did they have any support, like to deal with that stress? Counseling, therapy, anything?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't know much about what support CIA personnel had. The CIA is very secretive, but it's safe to say their well-being wasn't always the top priority.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? They focus so much on breaking the detainees' minds that they didn't think about their own people.
Yeah, it's a blind spot. When you're in that world, so secretive, You just focus on the mission, the objective. You lose sight of the human cost.
And that cost is huge. It's not just the trauma for the detainees, it's the ripple effect. It hits families, communities, whole societies. We talked about the global network that made this possible, but what about America's reputation? How did this affect how the world sees us?
The damage was serious. The black sites, the torture, the CIA secret prisons, it all undermined America's image as a defender of human rights. It made us look hypocritical, especially to countries where we'd been pushing for democracy. And it gave fuel to anti-American groups.
Actions speak louder than words, right?
Exactly.
And what the world saw didn't match what we said we stood for.
It's tough to come back from that. Rebuilding trust takes time, especially when it's about human rights.
So where are we now? Has the U.S. tried to fix things? Apologized.
There have been attempts. Obama banned enhanced interrogation techniques. He talked about the program, said it was a mistake. But no official apology, no full accounting of what happened, and no real effort to hold anyone responsible.
So some steps, but a long way to go.
Yeah.
What about the victims? Have they been compensated?
Some got settlements, but many haven't. And how do you compensate for trauma, for lost trust?
Yet justice isn't always about money. It's about acknowledging the harm, holding people accountable, and making sure it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. It's about supporting the victims, helping them heal and rebuild their lives.
This has been heavy but important. We can't ignore the dark parts of our history. We have to learn from them.
I agree. The Black Site program, it's a stain on America, but also a reminder human rights are fragile. We got to defend them.
And we all have a part to play. Holding the government accountable, making sure our country lives up to its ideals.
You're right. We can't just sit back. We have to be informed to speak out against injustice.
This deep dive, it's been a real journey. We went deep into the war on terror, faced tough questions and some uncomfortable truths. But we've also learned, haven't we, about the importance of human rights, how fragile democracy is, and how we can't let our guard down.
Couldn't agree more. I hope this encourages our listeners to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for what's right.
That's a great way to wrap this up. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive, and keep digging deeper, folks.